Huzzah! Huzzah! Bonjour, bonjour.
Bonjour messieurs.
Lafayette.
Good to see you all, monsieur. You're in the French fashion of the Basque. Well done. Hello, monsieur. Well, what a delightful greeting by everyone. Monsieur. Well, I look for you. You're right. I'm glad to see you are prospered and you have a better half with you now. Madame, you're wearing the latest fashion. I am totally Doctor? Doctor, forgive me. A pleasure to see you. It has been so long, over 40 long years.
Yes, it has been. Thank you for coming to here to Belchertown. And with your leadership and General Washington's wonderful war, we became a great country. So thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you for your service and for taking the time to greet me. I knew I had to stop and see before I continued on to Charlestown.
Thank you so much for coming here. Thank you.
My heart is filled with joy, my friends. Mesdames et messieurs, chers amis, good people of Belchertown, my dear friends, I am General Lafayette, though I do believe that many of you perhaps know me far better by my name of the Ancien Régime, of the old order, of the Revolution here in America. And that, of course, is Marie-Joseph Polyphrote du Chebet de Montier, le Marquis de Lafayette. Would you all like to repeat that? Truly, what a pleasure and honor it is to see all of you on this rather gloomy day. This 14th day of June of the year 1825. But nonetheless, a day of celebration, is it not? Indeed, my friends, I am celebrating many things. I am celebrating my first return back to America in 40 long years. In truth, the last time I set foot upon American soil was just after the signing of the Treaty of Paris, which of course occurred in September of 1783, ending the Great War for American freedom. So thus I returned in 1784 to celebrate with all of you, my beloved brothers and sisters here in America. But, dear friends, even though 40 years have passed, we must never forget how that independence was in fact achieved. For all of those brave soldiers, sailors, and Marines alike who have fought and bled upon countless battlefields to achieve American freedom, let us applaud them all! Well, of course, my friends, I have spent some time here in America since my invitation came back in February of 1824, courtesy of your very own President of these United States, Monsieur James Monroe, to be what he called, for me, a guest of the nation, to tour all 24 United States. Can you imagine? Monsieur, 24. Do you realize the last time I was here you had but 13? Goodness, at this rate you'll have as many as 50 one day. Could you imagine? Well, as so many adventures begin, mine began in New York City on the 16th day of August of 24. There in front of 90,000 of its inhabitants. What a welcome. I then traveled northwards into the upper part of that state, transferring to Connecticut, onwards to Rhode Island, Providence to be sure, and then of course into this great land of Massachusetts. My friends, I went onwards to Boston. And then I went to even Quincy, where I met with your second president, Monsieur John Adams. You know, upon reflection, It was he and Monsieur Jefferson who once said of me that I had a canine appetite for popularity. Indeed, I guess they're right in this moment. But regardless, it was a pleasant visit. Traveling southwards, I went to the great and noble city of Philadelphia. And there I went to that place where you declared for independence. In fact, I refer to it as Independence Hall, and I hope that name will stick. Then on to Baltimore, and then of course to the federal city of Washington, where I met and I thanked the president for his kind invitation. But you know, my friends, as I have traveled to places that I had been before, places that I had served in during the Great War for American independence, I then went to places where I had never been before. I traveled southwards into Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, up the Mississippi River into the Kentucky region, into the Ohio Valley, Indiana, Tennessee, into western Pennsylvania, western New York, and now I have returned once again to Massachusetts Bay. I am reminded of the many sacrifices that were in fact made. Sacrifices that the good Dr. there took part in. Sacrifices that you all took part in to achieve this independence. And friends, I am reminded, of course, of the last time that I met His Excellency General Washington. It was 1784. We had spent 2 glorious weeks together at his beloved Mount Vernon, there reflecting upon the war and the future of this nation. We rode on to a place called Annapolis in Maryland. We said goodbye to many officers we had the honor and privilege to have served with, and then onwards to a place called Marlborough in Maryland, and that is where we would say our goodbyes. But not before the General said this to me. He said, Monsieur le Marquis, I sincerely believe that the easy part was winning this war. Oh, friends, I could not imagine he would say such a thing. After all of the trials and tribulations we had been through, but he explained himself further by saying, I do believe that the much more difficult part will be for these 13 former colonies that have now formed 13 United States, well, getting along with one another, surviving into the future. Well, dear friends, look at how far you have gone. From 13 to 24 United States, you have endured war, civil strife, turmoil, yet you have endured. And why is that? Well, I dare say it is because of the foundation that was built at the price of so much sacrifice and blood by you, the American patriot. In fact, I will go further. I will say that one day this nation shall serve as a beacon for all other nations to look to, as the truest example of freedom and of independence. God bless you all, my dear friends, and God bless this great nation of the United States of America!
I'd like to introduce Mr. Tom Stockton to you. He's the president of the Belchertown Historical Association.
Thank you, and good afternoon, and thank you all for coming to help us commemorate this historic event. This historic event emphasizes and draws attention to our town's history, which we celebrate our local history with our annual reconstructions and the living history at the Stone House, and we'll do next weekend with our Dwight Day. But not just our local history, but the interconnection between our local history and our nation's history. And with that in mind, it is my honor to, on behalf of the trustees of the Stone House, to welcome the Marquis de Lafayette and to welcome him to our beautiful town. Nous nous souvenons bien, General. We remember well your selfless contributions, which were such a vital contribution to our nation's history. And we are honored and humbled that you have included us in this historic progress, which celebrates and allows us to celebrate your life among us. Thank you for coming, and welcome to Belchertown.
Representing the Belchertown Select Board, Lisa Lassard Pearson.
I should, madame.
This is for you. Whereas the town of Belchertown is celebrating the bicentennial of the Marquis de Lafayette's farewell tour of America in 2025, and this celebration honors the visit to America of the last surviving Major General of the American Revolution, and whereas in 1777, during the American Revolutionary War, the young Marquis de Lafayette first rendered service to America by traveling from France to give aid to the colonies fighting for their independence, becoming one of George Washington's most trusted major generals, and whereas during Lafayette's service, undertaken at his own expense, he proved to be indispensable to the cause of American independence, both in his military and diplomatic roles. And whereas Lafayette was a lifelong evangelist for human rights, advocating for religious liberty, racial equality, and civil rights, and relinquished his own noble title during the French Revolution. And whereas Lafayette was an early and consistent voice against slavery in France and in America, where he constantly sought to persuade American friends, including George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison, to eradicate this evil. And whereas Lafayette supported women's rights in matters of education and divorce, endorsing and promoting the views of activists like Frances Fanny Wright, and whereas during his farewell tour of America in 1825, he visited the then 24 states, always speaking about the ideals of liberty, justice, and democracy. Resolved, the Belchertown Select Board hereby commends the Marquis de Lafayette for his dedication to the principles of democracy and equality for all, and proclaims the importance of celebrating the bicentennial of his farewell tour to America in 1824-1825. Resolved further that the Belchertown Select Board hereby declares the week of June 9th through June 15th, 2025 as a time to remember and celebrate Lafayette's farewell tour in Western Massachusetts. Sir.
Next up is our state representative, Aaron Saunders.
Good afternoon. This is an important day for Belchertown. It comes at a time where the parallels of the years in which Lafayette came back to America to visit feel a bit like our civic life today. And I want to take a moment to remind, I know there are a number of students of history here, but that the General's visit came less than 2 decades after the United States' next major conflict in the War of 1812. It would be less than 40 years before our nation's greatest test in the Civil War. And when we hear Lafayette's words about the greatness of America in its infancy, in this time of growth, it's instructive to us now, I believe, at a time of great consternation, to remember those patriots who fought for our freedom in the first instance, for those many women and men who laid down their lives for the same in in the 250 years since. These moments, in knowing that our community was part of this momentous tour, needs to and ought to be remembered. General Lafayette's contribution to our freedom needs to and ought to be remembered, not only on the anniversaries, but day in and day out. We ought to remember, at the ripe old age of 19, for no pay, volunteer to participate in what was and continues to be the greatest experiment in democracy in the history of the world. And we here today inherited that. And it's incumbent upon us as citizens to do everything in our power to ensure that we honor the sacrifice of all those who brought us to this point. General, thank you for your service, and thank you for your visit.
And next up, State Senator Jake Oliveira.
General, welcome to the town of Belchertown and the unique role that General Lafayette played in the American Revolution, but not just our revolution, but into the fabric of our American soul. And what General Lafayette's connection to Massachusetts is very long and continues to this day. In fact, I have the privilege of sitting in the Massachusetts Senate chamber in front of a bust of the general, and may I say, the likeness of that bust to you is uncanny. That bust in the Senate chamber is the only bust in the Massachusetts State House of a foreign national. And that goes to show the important role that the general played in our history and founding of this nation. In fact, there's another role that General Lafayette played with the Massachusetts State House in some of our art collections. In fact, there are several different bays in the Senate chamber, which originally was the House chamber, and has the unique role of being the longest serving, continuously operated legislative body in the entire country and the entire world that is actually directly elected. That hallowed chamber includes a bust of General Washington, someone that you knew well. But prior to General Lafayette visiting the Massachusetts State House in 1825, the bust was actually mislabeled as Sam Adams. And in fact, when General Lafayette visited the State House in 1825, he looked at the bust of what was labeled as Sam Adams and said, "That's not Sam Adams. That's George Washington." So thank you, General, for continuing to update our history in Massachusetts. In fact, we in the Massachusetts House and Senate have taken on an effort to diversify our collections of artwork and paintings in the State House. If you visit there to this day, you'll notice white men are very disproportionately represented. We are changing that. We have included new busts of people that better reflect our Massachusetts history, including a bust of Frederick Douglass, who was placed there 2 years ago at the start of Black History Month. And we have 2 open bays in the Senate chamber, and they are for the women. And we had a contest. And a survey to poll people that visited the State House of which Massachusetts women that should be represented. And we actually couldn't settle on just one, we settled on 2. The women that will be represented in the Massachusetts State House, and we are developing and working with an artist to develop those busts, are someone that you visited at Peacefield, the husband of Abigail Adams, who did so much for the cause of revolution during our American Revolution. And the second bust is a woman named Elizabeth Freeman. And it might not be someone that you think of, comes top of mind, but Elizabeth Freeman was a black woman, born into slavery. And she was the first person in this nation to successfully petition the courts for her freedom. And she will be represented in the Massachusetts Senate chamber alongside Lafayette's connection to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts extended well after the General's death. In fact, he is buried underneath soil taken from the Bunker Hill Monument and the Bunker Hill itself. So part of Massachusetts is now in France and part of the history of the Marquis de Lafayette. In fact, General, on your visit 200 years ago, he laid the cornerstone for the Bunker Hill Monument. And a few short weeks from now, or a week from now, we will be celebrating the 250th anniversary of one of the first major battles of the American Revolution, the Bunker Hill Battle, where we lost many, many American soldiers, but eventually led in 1776 to Evacuation Day, where the British ultimately left Boston for the last time. It also, coincidentally, is the same day that we celebrate Irish heritage with St. Patrick's Day, March 17th. A coincidence in South Boston for a great holiday. The connections of Lafayette and revolution and sparking self-determination and self-governance continues to be alive and well today. In fact, General, just over a week ago, this community in the town of Belchertown exercised one of the last bastions of direct democracy in the entire world. And that's something called town meeting that we have only in New England, where citizens of a community can gather together and make decisions on behalf of their community for their future. That is democracy in action, and that is alive and well here in Belchertown with over 1,000 people that gathered just over a week ago. That's kudos to the citizens of Belchertown who continue to exercise their democratic values. Again, General, thank you for being here. You have been an advocate for not just revolution and democracy, but for women's rights, the anti-slavery movement, and in fact, in your home country of France, authoring something that is based on our Declaration of Independence, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizenship, which outlines for generations to come within Europe the rights that we have as individuals. So on behalf of the Massachusetts Senate, I welcome you to the great town of Belchertown and thank you for continuing to keep democracy alive when we need voices to lift up democracy each and every day. Thank you again.
So that concludes our program for today, but before we bid au revoir to the Marquis de Lafayette, I did want to thank a few people who made this event possible. Sally Shaw, who does everything with the stand. Karen Harrington organized the event that was down to Lou Lorraine, who's our former BCTV guy and still our go-to guy for any sound and technology equipment and help open up the building and make this all work. And lastly, thank you all for coming. These events don't happen without people, so thank you.
Forgot someone.
Oh, yeah.
Cliff McCarthy.
Where's Mrs. Shaw? Yes.
Madame, I will tell you this before we begin our dance. Before the American Revolution, I was at Versailles, there representing my family. And when I was supposed to cast to the left, I cast to the right, and the Queen herself, Marie Antoinette, laughed at me. So I hope you shall not be as harsh as the Queen was.
Try not to be, sir.
Well, gentlemen and ladies, I thank you so much for your kindness, your hospitality, for this welcome, for this dance, for this music, for all of your words, for all of you distinguished guests for coming and to share the love of America, the love of liberty. Let us all learn from history, for I am a firm believer that all of the answers to the future might be found in the past if we study our history. So my friends, I shall remain available for all of you for any questions or curiosities, or if you're in want of painting a quick portrait with me. Most of all, I thank all of you of Belchertown for your kind hospitality and welcome. I thank you.